Let me introduce our first speaker, and what I can say about him is there is a breed of people who's passionate for sharing knowledge and contributing to community, and their contributions are so profound and so well known that the community decides to award them with a Java Champion title. And we are happy to have a Java Champion here. So please welcome our first speaker, Java Champion Sebastian Daschner. Sebastian, it's great to have you here. I mean, I could tell a lot about you, but this title is like encapsulates all and everything. I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you, Dimitro, for this wonderful introduction. I'm glad that you didn't say more about it because, yes, maybe stop. But yes,
that's great.
I
have a saying that's like that I like a lot from your bio, and I'd like to ask you a question regarding that. So, like there is a perception. Some people say that AI tools are like removing some fun from development, and takes a bit of that out of the process. But I know that your mission is to make the software development more effective and ultimately more enjoyable. So is AI a part of making things more enjoyable, in your opinion?
I think so, yes, because I think it can be another very helpful tool that we can use in an effective way, in the same way like we use a modern high level programming language or some automation that you can create. And in this way, it can make the job more enjoyable by removing the boring, tedious bits and by giving you more time on solving the actual problems and what you should do as a developer. And
that's
happy
perfect.
to talk a little bit about this today.
Yeah, I know that you have a whole talk regarding that. So the stage is all yours, and we are happy to listen.
Perfect. Yeah. Then thank you very much. And yes, welcome from my side. And I'm very happy to share all of this with you about some coding stuff with AI, and especially some ideas and experiences about AI tools and agents and anything from a perspective that makes you more effective as a developer. So this is really an interesting topic. And I mean, the first real successful stories with LLMs have been out there since basically the advent of ChatGPT, and it grew ever since. And also what I'm telling you now will be a little bit obsolete in a few months because you will see different tooling and different developments. But I want to share my experiences so far from a more general level. So it's not about specific tools that I use now or some IDE integrations and whatnot, but more about how to approach this topic, but really from a pragmatic perspective, what this means for your daily work as a software developer, what you can use, what can be helpful, where you have to be careful, what doesn't really work that well. And we'll see a lot of examples for this. So let's get right into it. My name is Sebastian. I'm originally from Germany, and I work a lot with Java. I do a lot of consultant business. I did a lot of content and knowledge sharing, some training, and a lot of stuff. Mainly about Java, in general about IT. I like to think of what I do more in terms of I want to help projects and developers in general, like anything that an IT project needs, might be programming, but not only. And this is another example because I'm also a big fan of everything that is just about efficiency. It can be automation, can be some command line tricks, can be bash scripts or some other helpers. And AI gives a big opportunity in this regards also from other angles, just anything that can make us more productive. So let's talk a little bit about this coding with AI. From my perspective, what it means or what is the goal, that is just effectiveness. So you shouldn't really be afraid of AI as a software developer. So it's not going to take your job or replace you. It's basically just another helpful tool that you can use or that you can ignore. And especially about the second part, let me say a few words about this because very often we tend to get maybe a little bit scared about this, or we would like to think, okay, tomorrow some AI is going to do our job. But if you think about it from a much more broader perspective, especially taking into account the history of computing, it always was this way that our tools and what we use in our programming languages, our frameworks, our technology gets more and more efficient and more abstract. If you think about it, and I will show you some enterprise Java examples, if you have some enterprise application that talks via HTTP and connects to a database, usually nowadays you won't write an HTTP server from scratch, right? That you parse some HTTP GET message and, read all of the HTTP headers and then see trying to parse it. No, you would use a framework. You probably use something like Spring Boot or Quarkus or whatever you have. You use some application server that already does it for you. And then your code is typically coded in the Java world in a way where you have a bunch of annotations, and then magically all of that happens. So that is what we do all the time as software developers or as modern Java developers. We use a lot of abstraction. We write our code in a very abstract, declarative way, and the framework does a lot for us. But it's basically the same thing. You could say, okay, if I would like to write some HTTP requests from scratch, then this framework would replace my job. Like, no, it's more, your job can be more effective by not having to write all of this HTTP parsing yourself, but instead you can go to sort of the next level. You can immediately go towards the business logic that you can implement. And with AI, it can be a little bit similar, that you say, okay, what are the tools or the tasks that especially AI can help you a lot with? We will see a bunch of examples and experiences. And if you leverage that, then you can just be much more effective as developers, especially with all of the boring and tedious tasks that some complex project might have for you. So we're going to see how to integrate that into your coding, like into the actual coding workflows. All right. So a few things where we can have a look at it. I would like to separate the typical usages of AI, and especially with AI, I mean, in this talk, mainly large language models and generative AI is the typical chat applications. Think of it like your chat GPT. You have a website or maybe a desktop application or maybe on your phone where you can just usually in a conversational style put in some question or some prompt, and then you get a response. So these are very general purpose machines. You can ask it anything, and I mean literally anything. If you're interested in, tomato farming, you can ask it about the best ways to do this and how to handle the weather and the water. And if you like cars, how to repair a certain thing, about programming, about computers in general. If you get some weird error message that you haven't seen before, you can ask it pretty much anything. So it's very flexible. The downside of it, or a little bit what can be cumbersome, it has little or no context. Like basically, if you provide a prompt, you have to give it all the information, or you have to add the context manually, such as, uploading a file or providing a picture and say, hey, what is this? And things like that. So these are your typical, chat bots, chat applications, whatever you use here. We will see a few examples with ChatGPT. That's what I mainly use. But, there are a few others out there. They all come with their own flavors and have some pros and cons in certain areas. But that's about that. So we will see a few examples of this later. Can you use this for coding? Yes, of course. It is a little bit limited, though, because of the context that might be lacking, although this also might be a plus. It depends what you actually want out of the AI. For example, if it's just about a single question or a single error message that you can paste into that, it might work really well to paste this into the application and then close the session afterwards. Again, also with regards to the data privacy that we will also talk about a little bit later. So this can be really helpful. I will share a few examples of this later from your ChatGPT. What is a little bit more interesting as a developer is the code completion that you have inline meaning inside of your editor or your IDE. So this can be a single full line completion, very similar to what your Java IDE typically does, right? You start writing a method, dot, and then control space, and you get some autocompletion. Now, this type of autocompletion is a little bit smarter in a single line, or maybe even in a multi-line with a single code file. Okay, let's already go into that to show a few examples here, to not only have some slides. So this is a Java project. This is a coffee shop example project that I call coffee shop or coffee testing, just for the reason to have something here. And I will show you a few things with that later. I also want to explore this project a little bit, and we see how AI can help a lot with that as well. But for now, let's look at some class that is called string extensions. That is basically a helper class for a Quarkus Qt templating that can capitalize some words, right? So think of it as a helper class or a helper method, something that is static. So we can say, okay, please capitalize this word. Okay, now what is an auto completion or a completion for that? So this is what you already can see. Probably you can see it in this light gray. It just aims to complete something. Now, this is basically powered by, as you can read here, maybe the AI assistant. That is one particular example for such a tooling. That is the integration here in my IDE, in my IntelliJ, what I use. And this, it comes with some, well, specifications. In this particular tooling or this example, this runs locally. And this uses just the context of either this particular file or the project that you have, or, well, depends on the tooling. So that runs quite quick usually, because it's either a single file or just very few, a single line in the file or a very few lines. So here, for example, you see what could be there if word equals null or is empty and things like that, you know, a null check. Okay, this might be interesting. Or if I say word dot, now you see the difference. This one below here is your typical completion when you say control space. So what methods do I have? Get the bytes, for example, and then you can cycle through. But the AI completion is a little bit different. It aims to make more sense of it. So it tries to guess something, either based on the context or what you just typed before, right? So if you just had a bunch of lines of code where it's always the same style, for example, you're invoking a lot of getter methods and things like that, then it will guess the correct or the intended invocation. Although this is always, you know, it always depends. That's the funny story with AI. You will, you know, very seldomly have a reproducible result. So it might come up with something else. Whereas here, this autocompletion is very predictable. So here, for example, for some reason, if I now complete that one, not this, but that one with tab, then it will invoke trim, whether or not that makes sense. But this was just single completion, a single line completion in that. If I start typing if, then it would, you know, have that completion with the null check. Does it make sense? I don't know. It depends on what you aim to do. If I start typing something like a for loop, maybe, then it might think of, oh, what might make sense here? I go, for example, I have just one parameter variable here with a string. It might make sense to go through the length or maybe the characters inside and things like that. It just aims to guess something. Okay. Admittedly, this method is super simple on purpose for now. If you have something more complex, it might guess something else. But this is one example of just a line completion here that you can have. In this case, it is called IntelliJ, the line code completion from AI Assistant. A lot of different examples with Copilot, Cursor, different editors, different IDEs, things like that. So this I use quite often. I find this quite helpful, especially with the LLMs. As far as I know, also the IntelliJ uses a local LLM that they trained, which is quite, I would say, quite good. So it's quite fitting actually with what it comes up with. And the reason or the point that this is limited to a single line or very few lines, something like a for loop is like 3 lines, gives you the ability to do this faster. So it's quite quick, even when it runs local. So I use this actually quite often. At first, I thought I would deactivate it because it's annoying, but it doesn't annoy me that much. So if I don't want it, I press something else or delete or so. But it works actually quite well. Now, a slightly similar completion, at least in this IDE, is the more Copilot-like completion or the more freestyle completion, where you say, well, you can write any prose, for example, comment or add some Java doc comments. So you see, I didn't write a comment, I just actually typed here in English. And then it will actually start working and do this, in this case, powered by this AI assistant, and add this in this very code file. So just what is open in the editor here. And then you can accept this and say, okay, wonderful, it aims to add something here. Admittedly, this doesn't really make sense. I'm not a fan at all of generating documentation, because once you can generate documentation, then by definition, it doesn't add more value, because then, well, you could have generated it. So I want to delete this again. Let's instead say, okay, please make the method safe for null and empty string. Basically what it already tried to generate. So let's see what it comes up with. Probably this if null check, something like that. So you see, this is already not quite deterministic. Before it tried to do this in one line by just saying, for example, return a word. Now it had two if statements and things like that. You can combine them and whatever into one if statement. Let's see if that works. But basically, it will aim to do some things like that. Okay, so whether that makes sense or you would like to then return null and whatnot is up to you. Okay, do I use this? Sometimes. It is a little bit of a question also how confident and fast you are with typing, because, and this shouldn't sound like bragging, but sometimes I'm actually faster with just typing in myself rather than waiting for this AI tooling, especially when it runs locally and your computer's not the fastest. And then you might actually say, okay, until I wait these 5 seconds, I just type it myself. And that's a different topic. You should be familiar with the most important command line, the most important keyboard shortcuts in your IDE anyway. So you should be able to write something like word null return word quite quickly yourself, and then you don't have to wait for it and stuff like that. But that's a different story. Do I use this AI assistant? Yes, fairly often, especially the code completion that just appears like this, that appears automatically, but also the freestyle one where you can just type your prompt into your code file and execute that. So that's a very helpful example of some integration directly into your editor, into your IDE. So these are some examples here. I think the IntelliJ one works really well. I'm a fan of that, but there are many, many other examples of whatever IDE and editor you use. Okay, so now let's get a little bit more interesting with regards to the integration and also the capabilities. So the next category of helpers I would summarize or call as AI agents that are sort of agent software integrations with access to the code and or your computer. So they can be more general purpose based. For example, you can also ask it some questions and do some other tasks. I will show you a few examples. Or they can be more task-based, where you say, okay, please do this thing, and then it will come up with step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then execute these steps and do a bunch of things. And they typically integrate into either your command line or directly into the IDE and can provide more power. For example, you can say, please refactor something in a certain way, and then especially your Java-based IDE, it knows all of the, well, what is a method, how to refactor that, how to rename this, how to search for certain occurrences, so it can be quite powerful. A good example for that is what we're sort of already seen here is this AI assistant in IntelliJ. I will show a few other ones in a second. So basically, this is a little bit more powerful, where this provides, let's start a new chat here. It's a little bit small, but I'm trying to make this bigger and show you in a second. where you can think of it as some sort of chat integration here, even says AI chat, that has access to the context, in this case, to your whole project. So here you can just say, well, in this class with this particular code, try to do certain things. So for example, try to generate something here. You could have asked it the same thing, like please generate a Java doc, and it will do so. But this is a little bit more broader context. You can say, okay, generate a Java doc here, or as seen in the other file, please generate a similar style of documentation, or change the method in a similar way. So this has the much broader context, and you can ask it all sorts of things. But now we had a very concrete code example. Let's go a little bit back up from the abstraction level and just go into the project in general. So this is a coffee shop testing and example project. And now I would like to ask it, tell me something about the project. And this is something where AI and these integrations can be really helpful. Especially, I see this more from my perspective. I usually work as a consultant, and that means I come to clients, I come into projects that are very new for me. I don't know much about the domain. And then in a very short time, I sort of need to find out what's going on here. Which systems do we have? What is the communication? Can you give me an overview of things like that? Typically, I talk to people with this regard. But if you have a big project, a huge code structure, you can also ask the AI assistant, I see that there is something like a coffee shop application that I've seen in the documentation here. So which systems, let's see if I can make this bigger. No. Yes. Does the coffee shop application interact with? Let's say, what do we have here? And now it tries to come up with an answer. Let me actually see if I can resize the font size. Yes. For you, well, at least a little bit. Hope that's okay. Otherwise, this is a lot of information. I can read the important parts of it. But basically what it means, I have a project here, just for an example, integration with some Java microservices. One is called Coffee Shop. Then it interacts with some other systems. And here it tells you about the interaction. So we have two more backends or systems. We have a database. We have an external application that is called Barista application. And it will tell you this runs on that port, this runs on this port. And we have certain interactions here, for example, viewing orders, and it already will tell you about some, REST calls here. Okay, cool. Then let's say give a technical overview over the HTTP requests that are sent, let's say. And it will also try to find some information. So this is quite interesting how this works. It also can give you some more information how it comes up with this data. Like, for example, okay, at first I look into this file, and then it does a lot of guesswork. And I find this really fascinating. I will show you another example where this is more visible on the command line, where these agents really, they work a little bit like a consultant would, right? That you go into a project and you might be overwhelmed initially because there's a lot of stuff, a lot of technology. There might be some frameworks that you don't know. And then it does a lot of guesswork, right? Like if you say, give me some information about the HTTP landscapes, about the requests that we have. And then it tries to search for certain terms and then use the information that it finds to feed back into the next command, and then it sort of moves forward step by step until it comes up with all of this information. So that's quite interesting. What do we have here? It shows you, okay, we have some health endpoints and, orders. Okay, how can I post an order? How can I create a new coffee order here? And it will show you the technical information. That's, just for starting out right this, that's actually pretty cool. And, whether all of that is correct, we have to double check, but it's very helpful, especially to begin with. Like if I tell it, please tell me about this project, what does it do? Give me an overview. It can do so. You can ask it to please generate something like a diagram about what this would do. Let's say generate an ASCII art diagram of let's say the database models, whatever have you, right? And whether or not you have this in your documentation, you can at least, give it some idea or make it generate some idea about what is that about. So let's see, let's search for the database models. And there's also a way to tell it to give you more information. So then it would show you, okay, where does it look into? Does it look into the persistence XML if you have one? Here we use Quarkus, so very likely to use the JPA classes for the mapping, or maybe you have a SQL file, things like that. So that's kind of interesting. We have orders, origin, status, coffee type. So this looks correct. And again, you have the integration. So if you click on these file links, it will just open up there, and you have the entities that are being done here, create order, for example, and so on and so forth. So this is quite interesting. This can help you a lot here and show a lot of helpful information. Now, this integration, this assistant can also make some changes. So here especially you have a lot of possibilities, either chat or edit, where you can tell it, okay, now please make some changes actually. So not only, tell me a lot of stuff, but do some work and change something. And then you can also say something like this, make the method capitalize, save for empty and null strings. You can even do some typos. It will just probably come up with the right thing. And now it will actually change something. And then it will ask you about some confirmation. This also depends. You can change this actually in the settings, whether you want to be brave enough to just let it make the changes, as you can see here, and just apply them, or you can actually sort of like in a diff view, go over them step by step and accept them or not. So now we can say, please accept, and it already did change it. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so this is a more general purpose assistant that you can ask all sorts of integration about your code. It will aim to invoke anything that you can invoke manually in your IDE. So that also is a great responsibility, because it could start whatever. And it will actually, if you tell it to, I will show you this a little bit later, to generate a test, and then it will run and execute the test. It might execute the build. It might even start some integration test database, things like that. So like be a little bit aware of that. And now I want to show you, let's switch over to another example. I will show you a different tool where this is even a little bit more profound or visible. That is called codename Goose, which is a command line tool integration. So this comes from this company called Block, and it is basically a command line that runs in your command line with some integrations that some of them are built in that make use of this protocol called MCP, basically a glue protocol for which you can connect a lot of assistance, a lot of tooling in the AI world. And then you can run stuff on a computer, which is both very interesting and also a little bit scary. So with this, that's a tooling that you can call, is called Goose. So let me go one here. There we go, into my project. So that is this project that we've just seen. So here I have my changes actually. So I can have a look at this file that my IDE changed. By the way, pro tip, if you try out these tools, all sorts of tools, always do this on a clean Git repository, then you immediately see the changes. So whatever it did, especially when it goes a little bit quick, then you can otherwise lose the overview quite quickly. So this is really helpful to have a diff later on. And I usually wouldn't let it commit or push something just on its own unless you're very confident then it will work. So let's undo this, the change in this class. And now say I want to go and start a new session in this tool. So here, this is an integration for the command line where you say you can integrate it into what you have in your command line directory here. I can say list all the files here, and even made a typo. Doesn't matter. It will just now go to an LLM. We'll show a little bit later what it does. And it will just do some stuff. And I'll help you list all the files, and it will execute the command. And it just did. So this does execute, depending on the extensions that you have active in this tool, this will execute stuff on your computer. This is both cool and scary. So if you trust it, or if you, know what you're doing there, and depends on the extension that you have active, it can be really helpful, but also, with great power comes great responsibility. So this now just gives you a summary here. It does tell me something in German. I will show you in a second as to why. It's also quite helpful. And just what I have in this directory. You see it for yourself. So obviously this is quite simple, but it might come with a little bit more profound things, especially when you ask it about certain shell commands to execute it. Like, I use the command line a lot, but I don't know if I can call myself an expert because there are a lot of commands that I keep forgetting, or, I'm not a bash expert. So this is really helpful, is to say, okay, please invoke this bash script that stops all my Docker containers at once, or only the one that is called coffee shop and things like that, and it will do so. But I'll make a few points about this later. So this is quite interesting, but it also has a coding integration. So I can say, please generate, or let's say, please create a code level test for this class that we had, string extensions. Why? Because we don't have one yet. If I go to this class, let's close this, I don't have a test. So this is just a capitalized static class here. And this is all I just told it. I didn't tell any package name or whatever. My command line is in the root directory. And now, as you can see, and here this is quite interesting because it will tell you right away what it does. RG is a search tool. String extensions, what does it come up with? With some path, string extensions Java, that's this class. Okay, view. And then I create a test and blah, 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 blah. So it will see the current structure. So we do have a test directory structure in my project, and then it will create a test similar to that. So it will write this. I've created a comprehensive test and blah, 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 blah. Will give you some overview. And then let's have a look. It should, yes, have created a class here, or a file. So it will, let's untracked. Let's have a look at it. Now it appears in my IDE. It will have created this class. Okay, interesting. This is sort of readable. And again, as I told you, that's the funny thing with doing demos with AI. When I tried this out a few times earlier today, it came up with a different test. It actually came up with a few invocations here in line. Now it came up with a parameterized test and an annotation that provides like expected and actual. And that's kind of interesting, but okay, why not? Let's actually tell it, I don't like the, what is it, CSV source. CSV source, please change to code inline invocations, because why not? And then it will also change this. Okay, so this is kind of interesting. So this is a little bit different to this AI integration that I had in my IDE. It's just a different tool. It can do different things just because it's on the command line. There, it comes with a lot of integrations. So, you can have an MCP server for calling something over the phone or whatever, and then you can tell it that. So especially as far as I know, in the second talk today from Polina, you will learn more about this, how to integrate this in actual coding something with LLMs. Here I want to show more the usage for tooling. So let's see what it actually did. Oh yeah, that's what I meant. It now changed that to simple assert equals and invocations. Depends on your choice. Okay, wonderful. Now, if you already know that you would like to use it in a certain way, for example, like per default, always tell it, when I tell you to create some tests, please generate them in a certain scheme and things like that. There is a way to tell this to the tools and basically to all of the tools available. I'll show you the IDE integration in a second. Config goose goose hints. There is a file where you say, okay, I can give it some hints or some always applicable prompts that I don't have to type all the time. Just please always do them. So for example, along with the language of the question, respond bilingually in German as well. That's actually the reason. Now that's the solution why it talks German to me. Just as a second thing, because why not? I just told it. If I remove this, then it will only respond in usually the language of the prompt. So this can be helpful. This is just one of thousands of examples that it can do. If you say, when I generate some code, please always add a Java doc. You can write it here, and then it will do so. Okay. Or for here, that's a quite nice story for somebody who's not that much familiar with English, where you say, okay, some Ukrainian developer who's just learning English, and they might say, okay, it really helps me if it talks bilingual so that I sort of understand. Why not? So let's try this again. Let's remove this actually. Let's say, please create a code level test for string extensions, something like this. And then it will do a similar thing. And at the end, at the summary, it will also create bilingual again. So that's pretty much that. Now we actually see what it will come up with. It might just create different code. That's the story about that. And also you see it comes up with slightly different commands. So that's the thing of some generative AI that we always have to be aware of. So let's see this. Did it already create the test? Yes. Now you see it's a little bit different. It now added some comments. Here are the comments in English. And now it also gives you some overview of what it did in Ukrainian. Okay, cool. So that can be helpful for somebody who's learning the language. Again, you can add all sorts of stuff in plain text to such a hint file. Okay, very interesting. Now, just as another tool with a slightly different way of working, another example that I want to show you is also JetBrains tool that is called Junie, which is similar as an AI agent, but more task-based. And this is also kind of interesting for a different reason, because this really works more like a professional developer. So if I remove all of this stuff again, if I say, please remove this class, and now I go back to my string extensions, and now I tell this Junie integration. So for example, same story, please create a code level test for that. I didn't copy something. Create a code level test for string extensions. Now what this does, it is more task-based. So it will come up with the details. Oh God, 1 second. A detailed step by step. Do I have some? I hope I can increase the font a little bit. No, I can't. Oh, I'm sorry for that. I don't know if that works in just very quickly. Otherwise, I can read it to you. It's actually, the content is not that interesting rather than the structure. So you will see it comes up with step 1 to 5, and then really try to go through that step by step. So, examine the class to understand the functionality. Look for existing test structure. Check existing test classes to understand the testing style. Create a test class, add some Java doc, and then run the test to verify that it works correctly. And this will also execute some stuff there. It will actually run your tests. It will do so in a second. Okay. Now, what does this do? This depends a little bit on the integration where this is running. Now, that particular example uses the LLM capabilities by JetBrains to run that. And now it will actually ask you to run the tests. So here, if I say run commands, now actually it will execute these tests, as you can see. Okay, cool. Now, step number 5, what I did, add a Java doc with author Sebastian Daschner. Why is this the case? Well, because there is a similar integration, .Junie guidelines, similar to this hints, what we had in Goose. You can also add some general guidelines that it always tries to apply. All Java classes should have a Java doc with the author, my name. Please don't do that. Such Java docs are really unnecessary, especially if we have a Git history, like that's useless. But, for the sake of the example, let's have a look at the test. So this again shows you some diff view. Let's make this smaller that we actually see something. Yeah, please add. Where is it? String extensions, test. And now it added this Java doc. And now again, with the CSV source, we could change it and things like that. Okay, now you can see it asserts already. It saw that it will provide some exceptions when we don't have that. So now if I say change the capitalize method to not to be safe for null and empty string. And now I expected that it goes through that like step by step, changes the method, but also changes the test, updates the test, and then hopefully executes the test in a way where you see that this works as expected. So is it running? Yes. It comes up with a plan with, what does it say? Examine the current implementation, modify the method, update the test, ensure the Java doc, and run the test. Yes. So you see, this is a little bit of a different approach. You can do similar things, but that's more of a task-based AI agent, like really as a professional developer would work or should work. When you say, I have my checklist of things, it actually comes up with the checklist, but then it does so step by step. So this can also be just helpful with this integration. Again, these are very simple examples that I show you, but there is almost no upper limit in complexity. Like, for example, you can say, please go through my whole project and look for all of the classes in a certain structure and then refactor them in a certain way. And you can write this, in plain language, like try it out for yourself. It is quite sophisticated. What is the downside? Especially here, you see it is quite slow. I mean, have been talking the whole time. In that time, I could write the test myself and it's faster. So it also depends. It might make sense actually when you say, I know that it will work quite well if I have a more complex task, and then you start it and then you go and grab your coffee and, you drink your coffee while the AI keeps generating, and this might work. So this might be helpful. Now we can run the test and let's see what it did. Test is still green. Cool. What did the test do? Okay, it asserts that this is empty. It asserts that this is null. So you saw the test have been updated. The method, of course, have been updated, and that's it. So worked quite well. Awesome. So this is an example where such AI agents can help you a lot. So again, they are quite flexible, especially with this integration of what is called MCP servers, where you can even code your own stuff, but for that, you can see the next session. And then you can do whatever you like, especially on this command line. This is quite powerful. You can integrate it with all sorts of things. But again, can be a little bit dangerous because, it can run some stuff. Where can this be further helpful? I showed you generating some documentation, explaining some stuff. It can be helpful with generating automation. For example, see my project and please generate a bash script how to run all of these Docker containers where I have a Docker file, and then you have a bash script, and then you can do so. So how would I use these agents? I use them actually quite a lot, but I wouldn't use them for day-to-day tasks. Like, for example, when you say, I always tell it to, list my running Docker containers, then this doesn't really make sense. Then I would tell it actually instead to say, give me the bash script that will do this for me. And then I just run the bash script because that's faster than asking the LLM every single time what the bash commands are for doing that, right? You get my point. So for all of the tasks and queries and prompts I have, I would like to think about it in such a way that I only have to do them once, and then I save the result in some way. Can be, a bash script, can be an automation, can be some other tool, or I tell it to please generate some code that does this in the future that I don't have to ask every single time. Or when you say, I did this with the ChatGPT, the whole chatbots a few times, when I was going through some, more sophisticated question, and then, you have to give another prompt. Oh, this didn't work. Give another prompt. Then at the end, I tell it, please now give me a summary of everything that, like the outcome of what worked, so that I don't have to, save the whole chat history like you would do in WhatsApp or whatever, and then scroll through and see what the history was, but where you can actually save the outcome just to save some time, right? So I want to use it once, and now I'm sort of done with it. Please, please generate or save the essence of it. Okay, so that's another example that we've seen. So these are the most important different types of integrations. And now let's move on for a little bit of, well, takeaways and especially experiences. And we have a lot of, these are pluses, a lot of positive points and some negative points. So where these tools and AI integration in general works really well and where it doesn't work so well. So especially what we have to take into consideration. So just without any order of priority, what works really well, where we can use some AI tooling, depends what you want to do. It pretty much doesn't matter if it's here a chat application like your, ChatGPT, or if it's an integration into your IDE or your command line. Where it works really well is with test permutations and test data. So if I say, this is the method, please generate all sorts of permutations for it. As you've seen, this worked quite well already for my tests because it aimed to come up with all sorts of stuff. Like this is also what I would generate, right? Like, a normal test in all caps, empty string, null, whatever. You can ask it to have some Unicode characters, add some Cyrillic to just be a little bit more, have more test data. But this works quite well, actually, in general for AI, for generative AI to do something. Where it does work fairly well is to create code when you give very clear instructions and boundaries. Like when you say, for example, especially this was true in the beginning of ChatGPT, when you say, oh, please generate a whatever Angular project, and then it comes up with something. And sometimes it's really good and sometimes it's, well, not so much. But the better you give the instructions and the boundaries, the better the outcome will be. As I put here, ask better questions, get better answers. So this is really the case. The clearer you are, usually the better the result will be. That means if you use such a tool with the context integration, as in your IDE, this works quite well because you can tell it, hey, do the test or do whatever you generate exactly in this way, as you can see with the existing code structures. And then it fits into the look and feel, into what you would like to have, right? Because then it will come up with similar packaging structures and method naming and all of the stuff. Or you can do this precisely. You can actually tell it, if you create something, like do it in this way. This is why also these hints are quite helpful, these general prompts that it will always use. And then it likely will come up with something that you think is quite acceptable. So where it's also quite helpful is any sort of random error messages and questions and something that is not really your domain. So this is quite interesting. I have some examples here. Probably that's quite small, but it doesn't matter. These are just because, as I told you, you always get different results. So I took some screenshots from ChatGPT. When I set up my a new laptop I use Arch Linux, this crazy Linux distribution. This is something. Now I'm actually quite profound in it, but sometimes I just have some stuff where I don't really know so much about it. And there it can be really helpful. Instead of going through a lot of forums and blog posts, you can just tell it, well, how to configure my Windows system for a laptop to do the, touchpad click and whatnot. And it came up with really good results here. Or if I said, okay, now I want to set up my window managing, and I had some issues, how to troubleshoot that. I don't know where all of these log files are located. Here, sort of, please help. And this was quite helpful. And sometimes you can even go to the point where you say, I get a random, sort of specific, but really random error message. You paste it in, and very surprisingly, it comes up with pretty good context already. So probably because of the training data or the internet or whatever. So this can be really, really helpful to just, try it out yourself. Something similar, this is like I was refactoring some database, and then there was an issue with serialization, and it provided a random string that was actually in hex format. But I was like, okay, what's this? We put it in and said, oh yeah, this could be this and this. And this guesswork that it does is quite profound, quite helpful. So that came up with something here, and can be quite interesting. Now, This is an example of what I showed a little bit before. When you say, I would like to create a cucumber test for the following step definition. You don't have to read all of that. It's basically, that's a step definition of cucumber. And then it will sort of understand and will come up with some scenarios. That's cucumber syntax. Create, valid order, given, and when, then, things like that. So that's basically a generated permutation of tests based on the specification or the code that you gave to it. So this was just copied into this chat window. Or, of course, if you have the integration in your IDE, then that's even simpler because you can, it already has the context. So that's that. So this kind of interesting. Where it also can be really helpful is explaining some APIs and some technical background. When you say, okay, this Spring annotation I've never seen, so what does this do? From experience, this works quite well. I'm always a little bit cautious, so I typically would double check just if that's really the case, because, if you needed to explain it to you, you probably don't know the answer. And then this can be dangerous, because if it just explains this in a very confident way, you might like, oh yeah, this sounds good, but you don't really know, because hence you asked the question. So always double check. But with especially the typical things like, hey, how does this HTTP request work? What is the status code and things like that? Very likely it just comes up with the correct answer. So this works fairly well from experience, but always be a little bit careful. Then translating languages, both spoken languages and programming languages. That's not that much surprise since we talk about a large language model. That's basically what it does. Works really well. And especially also extrapolating from certain input and context, like to say, given this example, generate something in a similar style, right? Like this was the typical stuff with these chat apps when you say, please create a poem in the style of somebody. This works quite well by just, taking something, extrapolating from it, generating something new based on some already given context or given information. This works quite well from experience. Then this whole exploration, especially with the agents that have integration into your computer by reading files, executing some commands and things like that, exploring these things. When you say, okay, here is what I know about the project. I know it uses these technologies, or just, look at it for yourself and then see what we have there. And then it will just go and basically climb along from one step. Okay, this is this, and the next step, and feed the result back into the next prompt. And this works quite well, generating diagrams, overviews, some sort of documentation and things like that. With documentation, I would be more, I wouldn't use this as a documentation. I would use it more for, for yourself if you're trying to understand something. And then take it as a starting point, or, just for you to see what do we have in this project. Because for documentation, when I ask it before, please, show me what the communication here is, it might not be 100% correct. It might, just because of some command, miss some data and then not put this into the doc. So that's, I mean this not necessarily in using this as a final documentation, but more in terms of understanding what you have in front of you. Okay. And then what I said before, create some sort of helpers, like creating some bash scripts. I do this quite a lot. Creating some summaries of, of a long chat session that you have. Okay, go back and forth, do a prompt, didn't quite work, modify the prompt a bit, and then at the end tell me, okay, what is actually now what I need to store for myself. This is quite helpful. Some sort of migration, meaning one-time automation. I use this quite a bit to generate. In one project, I used Open Rewrite, which is a cool tool for Java for some, more mass semi-automated or automated migrations for Java code. And this API can also be a little bit, tricky, or you need to know how to do this. And for that, LLMs shine really well. Please generate this migration recipe that does it in a certain way. And especially with these sort of automation scripts, tests, something that doesn't necessarily end up in your production code, I would be very liberal in just saying, okay, please generate it, and I'll see if it works. If it doesn't work, I adapt. If it doesn't end up in production, I don't really care that much as long as it works. So that is also really helpful for that regard. So these are some of the takeaways here, especially on the positive side, where it works really well. Okay, so what are the downsides? There are not that many. These are some of the ones I saw. Basically, besides the downside that it's not deterministic. I mean, that's quite in the nature of it. And again, that's not, if it's a downside, I mean, it's up to taste. You know, if I tell it to generate a test class and it will come up with different results, which one is the correct one? Well, that's up to you, right? And then the right response to that is to say, okay, in the hints, provide some idea or further refine what you actually would like to have, right? To tell it, hey, when you generate some tests, please do them in a certain way, or look at the other classes and whatnot. So that's helpful. Yeah, that's not really a con. It depends just what you would like to have. Another stuff that doesn't work that well, finding some possibilities and functionalities within existing technology and APIs. That means, if I use my framework, can I use this? Does this feature exist? And very often it tells you yes, and you use it in this way, which is cool, except it's actually not correct. It hallucinates. So this is called hallucination, when it basically generates something that doesn't exist based on, well, the look and feel and the current context it has. Now, if you create some test data, then this is great. But if you're asking a question, hey, does this exist in the API that I'm using? Then it should not hallucinate. And it does so even if you tell it to please not hallucinate. So sometimes depends, of course, on the context. But I've seen this myself. So be very careful. I would still ask certain questions, but then immediately double check if this is actually the case, right? Like, in this library, does this feature exist, or how to use this feature? And it will tell you how to use the feature, and you can see if the feature actually exists. So that's, that's that. I told you this the same in a previous slide, basically about explaining some APIs. So always double check. It works really well when it works, but when it doesn't, don't rely on it when it doesn't. So just double check, especially these things. That's why I also told you, have the project here with a clean Git workspace, and then you see the changes. If you don't like them, make a clean checkout and try again. So that's why I would be quite exploratory with these LLMs. Where it also doesn't work that well, this is less a coding question. It's more like when I tried to find some, technical, computer components. I wanted to extend my network with some switches. And then I ask it, hey, which model can do this and this with some technical information and specification? It's not that great. I mean, that's also a very different type of task. You usually need like a reliable information, but then also sometimes that can be difficult with the internet. If something is not quite clear, you look into some forum, but maybe that person was wrong. Like, from my experience, this doesn't work that well. Where also it's really bad. I sometimes, for fun, I want to show this to some clients to tell some programming jokes. Maybe for some other jokes it's better, but all of the programming jokes that I tried were just either terrible or they actually didn't work. There was no point in the joke. So yeah, I don't know. That's another takeaway here. So this is basically some of the samples I'm showing. If I have, that's one more screenshot that I had here with some test data. So please generate a CSV file of English names in the format, name, first name, surname, and it will come up with some stuff. And even if you tell it, now please add a date of birth or whatever, and some age, it will calculate it correctly and stuff like that. So all of these things are quite helpful. So now, as some takeaways, this AI stuff can be really helpful. Don't be afraid of using it. Don't be afraid of just you losing your job based on that or something. It is just yet another tool. There is one more thing I want to show you with regards to data privacies and the IP, that means intellectual property, for what we at least quickly have to talk about. So what I showed you were some tooling integrations where it depends what the tool uses for the models. So typically they will either have, something running locally on your model, or have some integration into either the cloud or your own hosted model. One thing to understand, because that's sometimes confusing, the LLM itself actually is stateless. So the LLM itself won't store your code or something. You won't change actually the LLM and the model by sending some code. This is stateless. But the question is the data usage, especially with the APIs, the analysis. Like if I paste something into ChatGPT, do I know actually? Yeah, I know. Yes, they do use it. Like OpenAI, they will use your data. So be careful. If they do some analysis, if they further train the model, if then they ask you, was this response helpful? Yes or no, and then they further enhance, which can be good or bad. But just be aware of it. If you do want to avoid that, you can have some custom hosted model on your cloud of choice, although there's also quite some question, especially here with geographical location, so-called Cloud Act, if you want to look into that. So there's a lot of nuance there where it gets a little bit tricky, especially when we're talking about intellectual property and code that you would just paste into that. And also in some regards, also with regards to security, when you say, hey, I'm pasting my code, but maybe it does have a zero-day exploit that I don't know about, and it is quite a critical thing. And since you're based in Ukraine, I don't have to tell you that. So there's a lot of more nuance to that where you have to be careful. So there is a way to run models yourself, but this also comes with, as always, some caveats. The best way, if you want to check this out, at least to get started quickly, is the Olama, a solution where you can have a lot of different large language models that you can try out. You can run this locally, you can run it in Docker. So this is great for getting started. It might not be the fastest way, which is why you have to, check this for yourself. Depends if the integration with the GPU works correctly. It might be a good solution. So I've done that to have your own VM or private virtual server in the cloud. You can order a VM with a GPU intensive hardware, where this might be more expensive, but you don't have to run it the whole time, where then you quickly start such a custom hosted model. And then you just delete everything afterwards, and then your data is gone because, then it didn't leave any of this. So that might be a solution for that as well. But especially while coding, performance is also a question. So you need to put this into the consideration. Another solution is to use a tooling where you say, well, I trust this company, where they have in their contract written that they're not going to make any further training or use the data in a certain way. Also depends, but I cannot speak. I can only speak for that more in general, where you say, ask your boss and be aware of that. So please don't just paste some company internal stuff into some chat windows, but at least know, okay, is this allowed to use this tool? What is that? Maybe paste some code in a more abstract form where it's not about the code itself, but the problem, where you can already essentialize the problem that you have. This might be a solution as well, but at least be aware of it, especially with all of this integration, especially with the AI agents. There will already be some exploits of this MCP protocol where you say, hey, if I give it access to my computer, why not? It will just, it could execute some commands where it reads my data that's on my disk and sends it somewhere. Who knows? Be a little bit careful and mindful of that. And this helps a lot. All right. Now, there was a lot of examples and some experiences. So with this, Jakuyu, thank you very much for your attention. You find me on these social channels, and I hope this was helpful.
Yes, thanks, Sebastian. That was indeed very, very helpful, very exciting, and at some points it was unexpected, I would say. I didn't see, as I told you before, it's always nice to sneak peek because you always learn on this kind of talk. So thank you very much for your insights. Now time for questions. Unfortunately, there are a plethora of questions in the chat. Mm-hmm. I won't be able to ask everything, but I'll try to pick up the most
points, or maybe some questions that you have.
Yeah, totally. So please, whoever asked the questions, sorry, I won't be able to cover everything, but let's start.
So, it's on my social media channel, so if you're using the social media, please feel free to ask there as well.
Yeah, that's perfect. So the first question is, and I like it pretty much, is how do you understand the limits of AI in terms of how do you pick whether to solve the task by yourself or to delegate it to AI?
That's a good question. I would, as a general answer, I would say, okay, maybe it's something. I would like to think of it more in terms of what is a good long-term solution. So what I said before with the automation, for example, if I cannot remember how to run these Docker containers and things like that, it's very helpful to have it explained and shown to you like the first time or the first 2 times with this. But then if I really cannot remember that, then just please, generate a bash script and then it will have it. Or I actually will ask it to have a very short bullet point ASCII doc format that then I can save on my computer as a file where I can then look for the next time for some pointer. So I would like to think of AI usage as a sort of one-time usage. Like, when you meet somebody on a conference who is an expert on a certain topic and you want to pick their brain and say, okay, how does this work? Tell me about that. Tell me about that. But you get this chance only once, right? Or you don't want to, approach this person many times with the same question. Like you would like to either store it some way, store it in the terms of documentation or automation, and then take it from that. And with coding, I see it a little bit similar. Like I still would like to use most of my coding work like on the keyboard, like actual coding. And I say, okay, when I have something where I just, code my class, I still would use the regular features myself. I would, normally code. And it might be maybe the code line completion if it's faster, but I won't, for the most normal task, tell the AI assistant to please create a class because it's usually faster or better if I do it myself. It might be different if it's a one-time big operation, like to say I have a migration, huge project with thousands of classes and they all need to be migrated in a certain way, for example, then it might be helpful. But for the general type of coding work, I rather would see it as a like one-time operation per question or per prompt, if that makes sense.
So yeah, the bottom line is do not put the AI into your CI pipeline directly, but rather generate tool for yourself that will do this thing reliably. Yeah. Okay, great answer. Thank you. The next one is that there are quite a few questions where people trying to understand how do you understand or how can you measure, for example, for your management that you become more effective with the usage of AI tool.
That's a really good question. I'm afraid I don't have a really good answer for that because I asked myself this for a long time already. It's the same when, I'm a crazy person who uses Vim and one of these people. And then you say, after a certain while, with the learning curve that you do type faster, you just are faster. But you cannot quantify it unless you say, hey, both of us, we're now going to implement the same time, the same feature, time runs now, you stop the time and then you see the result, right? But it's really hard to quantify that if you're just like, you're one person working on one task. And then 1 year from now, was it now faster than this other different task that you have done with a different experience, with different tooling? It's really difficult to tell rather than if the team has a really good tracking about, let's say, the task in a certain sprint, and then they know what the story points and hours and whatnot are. But I'm saying this because from experience, I know it's really hard to quantify. And that's actually a problem because we would have been, and I'm a big fan of the whole development efficiency, developer experience idea. We would have been way better already with just providing, training about how to be more effective about certain things. I mean, seriously, I went to clients and I had to argue about whatever the fee is for IntelliJ, like these few euros, where it doesn't really make sense when you say, hey, if I'm just a little bit more effective, it pays off immediately, right? It pays off in 2 hours of work or something like this, right? But then you would need to justify it and whatnot. And if we could measure developer efficiency easily, then none of that would ever be a question, right? Then it would be obvious to everybody to say, of course you use this, of course you get the best IDE, of course we pay you for the tooling, we pay you for the better monitor and keyboard if you can code better. That's a difficult one, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, thank you. The next question is about behavioral patterns and working with AI. So, does it make sense to whenever the AI makes a mistake, to try to explain this mistake and try to nudge them into making a correct thing?
Yes and no. So again, the LLM itself is stateless, so it won't change the behavior. It might change the behavior temporarily if you tell it in one chat session, in one chat window, and then the next time it might do it correctly immediately because it sees the whole context. But then if you start over with a new fresh session tomorrow, then it will have forgotten about it. So it only makes sense if you yourself learn from it and say, hey, I have this hint file, like what I showed you in IntelliJ or in Goose. Then the next time you just tell it, hey, please, when you do this particular task, then be mindful of that, or create it in this way, period. So that's the thing there. Again, if you then use a different model, you will come up with a different answer. So this, it depends. But yeah, from the stateless perspective, it doesn't really make sense, except you want to capture the context in some way. So you won't retrain the model by this if it just run a normal LLM.
Yep. Thank you. And the other question I find quite interesting is, will the proficiency of using the AI tools replace knowledge of libraries and frameworks? Should we now strive to look into how to more proficiently use LLMs and generate more code for ourselves, or should we still learn frameworks, libraries? Should we rely on that?
We should definitely still learn that. I would even say probably like no, will it replace this? Like no, not in this way, because it's still the judgment for many reasons. And there might be a lot of different reasons why to say, okay, I want to use this library because of, a lot of stuff about maintainability, about the license, about all sorts of things. And then how to use it. Yes, definitely, because you will be much more effective, right? Because does it make sense for you to know the Spring API if you're using Spring every single day? Yes, of course. Of course, you could go into ChatGPT and ask it every single time, what is again this REST controller? Please help me generating it. Yeah, but you won't be successful, right? It's the same thing of a junior developer who needs to look into, well, back then it was Stack Overflow every single time how to create this REST controller, but you would just need to know basic things yourself in order to be effective. And the better and better you get as a developer, that the broader this horizon of general purpose stuff and knowledge that you can just apply without thinking or looking it up should be bigger, and that should increase there. So replace, definitely not. It might enhance and say, oh, how does this work again? Or now please generate a documentation so that I can finally remember, or whatever. But I don't see this that much in a way that it will replace this so profoundly.
Yeah, so essentially the situation stays with LLM like it was with Stack Overflow. Yeah, you weren't successful just blindly copying code from Stack Overflow.
Exactly.
Eventually, you need to understand the thing.
Yeah. And actually, that's a very good point that I bring up, because this is still how I see the LLM results. The result might be much better, but I'm still skeptical in a way. I never just blindly accept stuff. I either look at the Git diff, I run my test, I see what it does. I'm not just say, oh yeah, it prompts something. Okay, tab, please just apply and not think about it. Actually, quite the opposite. You're sometimes tricked into that. Especially that's a little bit tricky because the better it gets, the more blindly you accept something because it works almost all the time. And then do you really catch that one time where it made that mistake? So,
Yeah, this is a scary part, that you are almost sure that everything works fine, but then all of a sudden it fails. And one more question from me, if I may. What's your experience with I tried the agentic approaches on small to medium code bases to large success. But what about the large code bases? Does it Are there any issues with when LLM cannot take all the context?
Not per se. The only issue is basically the token length, but this depends on the API that you use or the LLM provider that you use. I had some issues, I think, with Anthropic or something, so I needed to basically give them more money that they can increase the context, not with the general tokens in total, but with the rate limit. Because if you have a big context, then you basically send all of it immediately at once, and then at one package you have a huge number of these tokens, basically the number of words you can think of it, data size. And then sometimes you run into issues with that. But that's a tooling issue. I never had that issue with the IDE integration, like with the JetBrains ones that worked really well. And with the Goose integration, I just had to increase some limit there. Basically, it's not really a money question. It's more like that you don't run into the rate limit, the API is overflooded or something like this. That was the only thing. Yes. So then from my experience, the IDE integrations usually work a little bit better than the plain command line, because the plain command line, what it does, it always just reads files, right? And then if you have to read a lot of files with a lot of content immediately or at once or every single time, if you cannot store the session, then that is just a question that can be a little bit like a practical question because of the data size.
Yep. Thank you very much. That was really insightful, and the talk was amazing. So yes, thank you. We'll conclude the Q&A session on that. And there is one more thing I need to ask from you, is to pick the question you like the most, and someone will actually get some prize for for the best question. So.
I like the question. What was the second question? Remind me, I already forgot because it's getting late. About the
estimating the efficiency.
Second thing with
what was it about measuring the efficiency of
yes, exactly, because that's a tricky one, but also it's I mean, as a consultant I always get this, but it's perfect to think about that. I like the direction of the question and the implication of that, because it's really, that's what I'm trying to live to, get more efficient, and to say, hey, you see, it makes sense to have this tool, it makes sense to use, I don't know, the keyboard shortcut and all of these things, but yeah, it's tricky, but that's a very good one. It's a good keep it up.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you so much. It's good to have you on board. It's especially good to have a fellow Vim user on board. Makes things more joyful. And thank you for your talk. See you.